Hi everyone, my name is Dominic Arajado. I'm a web developer, and these are your guides, tips, and tricks to web development. So in this video, I'm going to show you the different ways you could use useRef in React. So useRef is one of the hooks introduced by React that lets you use state and other React features without writing a class, making it easier to build components and features. So useRef lets you reference a value that is not needed in the rendering, or lets you persist a value throughout the re-renders. To simply put, you can store any value in it and it doesn't cause any re-render when it gets updated. So one of the common examples or use cases in using useRef is basically store a DOM element, a document object model element, and manipulate it. But there are other ways that you could use it, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So let's get started. So yeah, I have a great React application right here. It's just a simple component that renders a hello world title. And it's already running in my port 3001. And yeah, although I've already mentioned that the most common way is to store a DOM element into a useRef, I'm just going to show you for the sake of it. So let's say I have a input element, which is a type text, and then I'm going to create a variable called input_ref, called the useRef function, and it needs a default value. So let's, for elements using the ref, you need to use null as your default value and then add a type into it. This is a input element, and then pass the input ref in the ref attribute. And there you go. So you can use or access the reference of the input in any callback or useEffect. So here I have a useEffect that will run only once when the component mounts, and I want to focus into this element. So I can do that by accessing the ref object and the value in the current. So this is how you access the current value of the reference object. And this exposes all the functions related to that object that I've stored. So this is an input element, and this should have a focus function. So you can see there's a optional chaining right here because current can be, null. So in order for this focus to not cause an error, we need to do a check whether this is not undefined or null. All right, so once I've saved this, let's see. If I refresh the page, you see that it automatically focuses into the input box. So this is one of the most common use case for ref. Is where you store a element like an input element and then do something with that element, like focusing onto it. All right, so what about the other examples of useRef? So let's say I have a counter right here. Let's remove this. Set counter, use state. Okay, so, and I want this counter to increase its value by 1 every second. So I can do that by having a useEffect on mount and introduce an interval. Windows set interval. Every 1 second, I want to update the counter. Previous value. In use state set function, you can actually pass another function to access the previous value like this. And then you can do that, and you can return a new value into it, value plus 1. Previous value. Previous value. All right. So let's see if this, and yeah, before I show you the user interface or the web page, it is good to clear the interval when your mount gets or your component gets unmounted. So we can introduce or return a function. This will be running when your component unmounts, and you want to clear the interval. All right, so let's see now our React application. Let me refresh the page. It starts by 0, 1, 2, 3. It increases every second. All right, so I want to introduce a feature that lets me stop this counter on a click of a button. Stop interval. Okay. And let's handle stop interval right here and pass it as a on the on click attribute. So how do I stop this interval? So this is one of the use case where you could use useRef to basically store this interval ID onto it and then access it in a callback like the handle stop interval right here. So let's do that. So I have the interval ID ref, call the useRef. Let's have 0 as the default value and update this by accessing the dot current and passing it a new value. So whenever this set interval runs, it gives you a number, which is gonna get passed on to the current, which updates the reference value. And I can basically, call the window dot clear interval right here and pass in the interval ID reference value. And I don't need this anymore. I can just call the same function that we have and do it like this. Okay, let's see if this works. So now my counter is running. I'm gonna click this button and it should stop the counter. And it did. So this is one of the use case where you could use useRef. You can store any value into it. And in this example, I'm storing the interval ID, which is a number. Okay, so what else can we use useRef for? So you can also, not only access useRef in the callback, you can actually, access it in a useEffect and do something with it. So let's say I want to keep this counter, but I don't no longer need to store the interval ID. I'm just gonna do it the previous way. Clear interval. All right, so it goes back to its original, functionality, which updates the counter every second. Now let's say I want to introduce a window event listener on a mouse click, and I want to log the current updated counter on that time that I click the window. So let's do that. Window that add event listener on the mouse. Let's say mouse down. Let me create the variable for handle mouse down function. And I just want to log the counter. Okay. Now let's have pass that callback in the mouse down. And as I've said, it's very good to, remove any event listeners or intervals when you unmount your component. So let's remove that event listener. Let's see what happens. So now the counter is running every second as expected. And once I click the window, it's logging 0, which is the default value. It doesn't get updated. So in this case, we could use useRef to basically refer to the, value of the counter. So I can do something like this, counter ref, useRef, use count as the initial value. And whenever I update the counter, I want to update the reference as well. So maybe I'll introduce a function right here, increase count. So counter ref that current increase by 1. And I'll pass this counter ref that current to the set state function. So now instead of doing this, I'll just pass the increase count. And here, whenever I log the value, instead of logging the counter, I'm gonna log the counter ref that's current. All right, let's see what happens. So now it's counting 1, 2, 3. And now as I click on the screen, as you can see, it's displaying or logging the value of the of the latest value of the counter. So that's correct. This is what we wanted. So this is one of the use case where you could use useRef. All right, so I can actually make a custom hook based on this. So basically I want to extend the functionality of a use state and also, have a reference to its value. So I'm going to create a custom hook right here, which I'm going to call it useStateRef. All right, so basically what I expect from this useStateRef is basically it's going to return me a counter ref at the third argument or the third element in the array result. So something like this, so that it's much more cleaner. And especially if you have lots of useState or useRef, it's much more simpler or cleaner to look it like this or to use it like this. So we have a state and a set state using the useState by React, and then we have a ref, which is also from React. So instead of using it like this, I'm gonna add an underscore and copy the same name, that state, and then it's gonna accept a new value. So value, and I'm gonna call the set state to pass in the value and also update the reference that current with the value. So this way, both of them will get updated whenever we call the set state function, and then we return the state, the set state, and the ref. All right, so let's solve the TypeScript error right here. So how do we, give this a type that is based on what the user has passed on the default value? So I forgot to pass in the default value right here. And this is also having a TypeScript error right here. We can use what we call the generics. So generics lets you, define that type that is based on what the user has given you. So it can be any letter. I'm using just S right here, but it can be A, B, C, anything you want. And now I can use this generic and pass it here as a type. And I can pass it here as a type as well. And I want to, another way to improve this use custom hook is basically having this array as a read only. I don't want it to get updated, or I don't want TypeScript to read it as a, an array that can be updated. So I can pass it as cons. So it's like a assertion right here, a type assertion that this array shouldn't be updated, or it is only read only array. All right. So now, yes, resolve the errors. Now, if I hover onto it, it is correct. It is a ref object of a number. So let's say this is a string. If you hover onto the ref, this is a ref object of a string. This is a set state accepting a new string, and counter is a string, this is how the generics work. And yeah, you can use object as well. It will be the same. And yeah, you can use this useStateRef custom hook on if you find yourself using both state and ref based on your use case. All right, I've shown you all the simple examples of the different ways you can use useRef. If you want a more complex example, maybe let's try that. Let's say I want to draw a box with a width of 100, height 100, background color red. Let's see. Okay. Say I have this box. I click onto it and I drag my mouse into it. I want the box to be dragged along to wherever I move my mouse to. And once I unclick, it should be, stay as where it is. So how can we do this? We can basically do this by storing the initial position of the box, deduct it with the position of the mouse, and it will get dragged along as you move your mouse. So let's do that. So first we need to, store a state for the position of the box. Set position, use state. So this position would be basically X and Y. And this will be position box. will be position as absolute. This is position X, position Y. Left is position X. So let's save this first and see that, okay, so top 0, left 0. So it starts at the corner of the screen. And we want to introduce a handle mouse down event. So this is a React mouse event on the div element. Okay, so how do we track where the mouse was clicked on the box? So let's say I click here, click here, click here. I want to record down where it was clicked on the box itself. So we can basically, let me just log it. Either client X and either client Y. So this is the position of the mouse where it was clicked on the box. Let me just, oh, I need to pass it as an on click. Oops. Okay, so when I click on it, that is the position of where I click on the box. And yep, as I click on anywhere, the position changes. So this is the position where I click on the box. Now, I want to store this in a reference so that I can access it when I move the mouse. All right, so initial position ref. This will be a useRef. Same thing, X and Y is 0. And initial position, the ref should get updated on mouse down. And there you go. So now we have the initial position. Now let's do the handling of the mouse move and mouse up. And the mouse move. And then we also have handle mouse up. Okay, so I want to handle this instead of passing it in the box itself. I'm gonna do a window event listener. And you may be wondering why can't we just pass it to the the box itself as a a function. This is because, for example, you have a parent element which is like a container. Oops, sorry. So let's say this is like a container. If it goes out of the container, if the mouse goes out of the container, you won't be able to listen to the mouse move and mouse out. So the more reliable event listener is in the window itself. So that's why we're using window event listener right here, right? So let me just remove that and continue with the code. Mouse up and the mouse up. Okay, so basically the mouse move will handle the updating of the new position, and the mouse up will basically just remove these event listeners once we're done with the dragging. So let's just do the mouse up first and just remove event listener. Okay, so mouse up, let's access the new cursor position. So cursor position, if you recall, is the client X and client Y. Let's update the new position with it. That client X, that client Y. Okay. So before I access the initial position ref, let me just show you what happens if we don't use it, and just update the position of the box using the position of the mouse cursor. Let's see what happens. Refresh the page. Okay, I forgot that this should be on mouse down. Okay, so let's see what happens if we drag the mouse. As you can see, the box snaps exactly at where my mouse cursor is. So this is not what we expect it to be. We want it to, not snap at all. We want to, the box stay to where it's positioned, and I drag it, more smoothly. This, to me, doesn't look smooth. So that's why we have the initial position ref right here to basically deduct that so that it stays where it is, but it gets dragged along smoothly. So let's do this. And now it should be, it should work as expected. Now you can see I'm able to drag it as where my mouse was. But now the next problem is, if I leave it here and I try to drag it again, it goes back to its original position right here. So we need to be able to, record down where its new position is before we start dragging it again. In this case, I will introduce a new ref right here, previous position ref. Same thing, X and Y. And this should be updated once you do a mouse down and just pass the position. Dot current. Okay, so what do we do with this? We will basically add it here. This will be X, and this is Y, and there you go. And this should work as expected now. I do a drag, I leave it here, I drag again. Now it's working fine as expected. So this is one of the complex examples of using useRef. I've used useRef twice here for initial position of the mouse cursor and the previous position of the box. So I want to show you another example. So let's say I have two input box, which is controlled by a state. So let's say this is first data, set first data, and this is John, and the second data would be Doe. Okay, so let's have this controlled by the input on change, set first data, target that value, same for second data. Okay, so let's test this out first. John Doe. Okay, it gets updated as I change the text inside of it. John Jane Doe. Okay, so let's say you have a use case that you will call an API. This, okay, when the first data gets updated. So first data. So you can pass it in the useEffect. And here you can, do something with these values. So anytime the first data gets updated, we will call an API that requires these two data. Okay, so I'm just gonna log it here. First data, second data. Okay, so you will encounter a linting error. You can see these squiggly lines right here. This is a ESLint error saying that, useEffect has a missing dependency, which is the second data. But our use case is only, we will only call the API or log these inputs only when the first data changes. So in this case, you can use useRef instead. Although technically, you can still access the second data or the second data most updated value, even if you do this without passing it as a dependency. But there are times that second data may not be, the most updated value because you're not passing it as a dependency right here. So the reference to it might not be the most accurate one. So in case, the most suggested way to handle this, basically store the second data as a useRef. So let's have second data ref. And we have second data as the default value. And I want to introduce to you a different way of updating the second data. So let's say I can create another useEffect right here. And whenever second data is updated, you can actually update the second data ref as well. So this is quite different from, the way we do the state ref. We are basically creating a set state and update them both here. But this is another way that you can, make sure that your reference is updated. So here, whenever second data is updated, you will update the second data ref as well. All right. So now the ESLint error is gone and my use case is met because I only want to log the inputs or the values only when the first data changes. So let's see this in action. John, I'm updating the second value. It's not logging it. And now I log or change the first value again. And there you go. It's logging the values. Now this is working as expected. So yeah, these are the different ways you could use useRef. I hope you find this video useful. Don't forget to like and share it with others. And so you can subscribe to my channel and see you in the next video. Thank you and bye.